Supernatural encounters in central Montana. This post entails a collection of supernatural encounters, which I've heard from friends and family members over the past few months or years. All of these stories will have taken place in central Montana. For privacy, I won't disclose exact locations. The last time I posted on here was when I was around 13 years old. I talked about how my father and I had a strange experience with a potential skinwalker, or skin changer as they're known in my culture. I'm now a senior in high school, and since the last post, my family and I have had our fair share of strange experiences. The first story I'll share is from my father, which took place in the March of 2022, I believe. When I was a freshman, we moved from our old ranch house to our new house. We're about 25 miles away from where my father and I thought we both saw a shapeshifter one winter morning. Since we've moved into our new house, we've had plenty of odd experiences, but this is one of the first I can recall. My father says that one night in the March of my freshman year, he remembers hearing a group of people conversing and talking just down off the hill near the creek below our house. For reference, we live about 21 miles out of town on a hill near the mountains. Our house isn't surrounded by trees, but you can see the mountain across from my house, which goes into the next county. Anyway, my father would go and check to see if there was anyone down near the creek. No one would be there, but this occurrence continued on for a few months, until one day it just stopped. My father is Native American, more specifically Amskapi Pikuni, or Southern Piegan, of the Blackfeet tribe. He grew up in northern Montana, on the Blackfeet Reservation. The property we now live on used to be both Blackfeet and Crow country before the establishment of reservations. The Crow and the Blackfeet were constantly battling each other. In fact, there's still bad blood between the two tribes today. Anyway, my father believes that the voices he heard were that of crow shadows, or crow ghosts. Growing up with the stories of my dad's people and traditions, I believed every word of what he said. I, too, have had my own experiences with crow ghosts in this same county, but that's for another time. This second story is from the summer of 2023, my sophomore year, going into junior year. My middle and sister and I used to go on evening walks down the dirt road every night. On this particular night, we had walked a bit farther than usual. By the time we were almost back to the gate which led to our driveway, the sun was nearly fully set. We suddenly heard what sounded like our youngest sister play screaming near the reservoir across the road from our house, just off the hill. I looked at my sister, let's call her R, and asked if she heard anything. She nodded, and I told her, "On 3, we run back to the porch." We did just that, and as soon as we made it back to our house, we asked our youngest sister, who was just watching TV on the couch, if she had yelled or screamed at all. "No, why?" she replied. R and I both just nodded and brushed her questions off. We don't really speak of that experience, but I believe that whatever my father and I saw 3 years ago followed us to our new house, or it at least lives in the general area, considering we only moved about 30 minutes away from our old house. This third story is a recollection of events which happened from June 2024 to around July or August of 2024. In the June of last summer, my father began finding old arrowheads and spearheads just outside of house, maybe 50 yards away, as well as down near the creek below the house. He believes that some of these date back to around 1,000 years ago. My father recalls that after finding these old arrowheads, he began to feel uneasy in the house. I began to notice a change in the atmosphere too. During the week of June 14th, my family, Mom, Dad, and 2 sisters, all went on a trip to visit friends in Wyoming. I stayed home because I was participating in club track and had 2 track meets that week for the Junior Olympics, which I didn't want to miss since they were qualifiers for regionals. My family was gone for a solid 4 days, and during those 4 days, I couldn't help but feel as though I was constantly being watched. During summer, we keep our windows open at night to circulate cold air since our AC unit hasn't been installed. It was late the first night. I was sitting on the couch with our Weiner dog, watching Army Wives. The windows and blinds were open. It was complete darkness in the house, apart from the TV screen. It was around 11:30 midnight, when suddenly I saw a bright flash of light reflecting off the walls, coming from outside. I paused the TV, an overwhelming feeling of uneasiness washing over me. I immediately called my boyfriend to tell him what had happened. I then began to hear slight tapping coming from below one of the windows, which was just across from me near our large dining table. I sent my dad a message about what I had seen, but otherwise sat nearly completely still. Once my boyfriend had convinced me to, I let our other two dogs inside the house and bolted to my parents' room. I finally felt comfortable enough to hang up the phone and let my boyfriend sleep. After that night, I was never out and about the house after dark. I would hunker down in my parents' room and turn on a show to fall asleep to. The whole week, things felt off. I would constantly feel the presence of someone else with me, even if I was completely alone. Once my family got back, I felt better, but still uneasy, and constantly on edge without even realizing it. On the 4th of July, me, my boyfriend, my dad, and two sisters all traveled to the reservation to stay a few days with my dad's family. My father brought a paper bag full of the arrowheads he had found to show his mom, my GMA, who is a professor and anthropologist at the community college on the res. She confirmed that they were extremely old. Later that month, my mother, my sisters, grandparents, mom's parents, and I all took a trip to visit my mom's brother, wife, and kids in Tennessee. My father couldn't come due to work. My mother traveled back to Montana after around 4 days because she had to work as well. My father later revealed to me after he picked my sisters and I up from my grandparents when we had returned from our trip, that during those days he was completely alone. Things began to act up again. He began to hear the same voices down near the creek. One night, he was in the living room. He could hear people talking by the creek, but wasn't able to make out what they were saying. He grabbed one of his old rifles and a Pendleton blanket and went to check it out. He even took one of our dogs down there. As the two ventured down the hill, the voices surrounded them. He said that Marvin, the dog, acted as though he could hear it too, but they never did find anyone. The next night, it was the same scenario, except he could hear distinct whispering coming from just outside the house, near our camper, which is about 100 yards away from the house. Again, he gets up to look, and no one, yet he can sometimes hear the whispering around him. The next day, he decides to leave a tobacco offering and pray to the sun. He began doing traditional ceremonies and leaving offerings, hoping the spirits would leave us alone. He smudged our house as well, and after that, he felt peaceful in the house. He assumed that whatever spirits had been messing with us were now out of the house, but most likely still on the property. It was probably that same night, after we had gotten back, maybe the night after that, I had awoken in the late hours of the night. I don't know exactly when, but it was pitch dark in my room, except for a small light, illuminating from near my desk. I have a pretty small room, and my desk on the opposite wall from my bed. Above my desk, I have track medals and ribbons hanging up. I glanced over and watched this small red light move up and then in front of my medals. I knew I wasn't imagining it, because I could distinctly see the shadows of my medals hitting the wall. I turned and looked at my ceiling, trying to ignore the light. That's when I noticed what appeared to be a shadow on my ceiling. It looked like if someone was standing next to my bed, but with a bright light behind them, at their feet. You know the way a person's shadow would be cast across a room if there was a light behind them? It was light that. I felt uneasy, but not scared, and fell back asleep. After that, for around a week, I had some very odd experiences. I remember waking up early one morning. The sun hadn't fully risen, and it was in the blue stage of the morning where it's light enough to see. I opened my blinds and looked out my window. It was a pretty peaceful morning. From where my window is, I can see part of the reservoir which is below our house. There are also large cliffs above the small reservoir, but during the time of year which this story takes place, the reservoir is pretty low, creating banks on all sides of the small body of water. Anyway, I was looking out my window when I noticed a strange-looking rabbit standing near a patch of sagebrush, about 30 feet from my window. It moved strangely, almost like it was a doll or stuffed toy. It reminded me of how you would imagine yourself running in a dream. Slow and weird movements, almost like it was running in slow motion or in water. But the strangest thing about this rabbit was that it didn't appear to have a head at all. It was only visible to me for maybe 3 seconds before it disappeared behind a large pile of sage. That was when I noticed the second figure. At first, it looked like a white light moving back and forth along the bank of the reservoir. However, as the sun rose, it looked more like a person wearing all white. At certain points, I could see what looked like its legs moving as it walked along the shoreline of the water, but then its legs would disappear and it would look to be just a torso. It would also disappear behind a hill, then reappear along the bank. It repeated this for maybe a minute or two. All I could do was watch uncomfortably, until finally it moved behind the hill and never came back. Personally, I believe that there is a particular shapeshifter being that resides in central Montana. Or at least, there's multiple. My boyfriend has seen this creature around 2 to 3 times whole, driving back to his house from mine. And if this post wasn't already so long, I would share those encounters too. Anyway, my only advice is to be aware that things such as that do exist, and to always trust your gut when it comes to it. I can only hope that this thing doesn't follow me anywhere else.